Hey. Morning. You guys doing good today? Thank you. Settle down. You guys are so full of energy this morning. Oh, I'm full of energy. We're kind of wrapping up the summer before the school year. We've got one more week, at least at our house, before school year starts. So for those of you in some of the surrounding districts, I don't know exactly when they start, but for us, we have one more week of summer before the new school year begins. And so as part of that, in preparation, because this next school year for us is going to it's going to include some significant changes to our schedule. Okay, so if you're not aware, there's like a 3-tier system for start times. Last year, the high schoolers had to be there 7:20 in the morning. They realized that's not good for high schoolers. Here's what we should do. We should make kindergartners do that. And so so that changed for us. The elementary schools, at least our elementary school, the school we're a part of, had to make that change, which means that starting in a week, Asher is going to have to be at school at 7 in the morning, which is a significant change from our schedule during the summer, okay? And then because of athletic stuff, Clara is actually going to have to be at school at 6 a.m. So... So in preparation for this, we decided, why don't we make that shift a couple weeks early, okay? Just to give us a chance to adapt to the new schedule. We've started waking up earlier at our house and becoming morning people, whether we want to be or not, which really means a couple of things about us. Number one, we go to bed earlier. And number two, we're generally much more crabby. And so that's the way it's been for us for the last week. And then we're even going earlier this week in preparation so that when the time comes, man, we'll just be ready to go. We haven't gotten there yet. Instead, we're thinking about homeschooling. So, or just getting our kids started on coffee. Either of those two options are good for us. We feel like both good parenting. No, we're not strong enough for homeschooling. And I think there's some sort of limitations on when kids can start drinking coffee. So, but we're coming to the end. We're coming to the end of summer, getting ready to start the new school year. And even as part of that, for us this summer, we've been fairly local, right? So we haven't gone too far. For our vacation, we went down to Branson. I call that a breakation, right? Like there's the staycation where you don't go anywhere. Branson is the breakation. So we did the breakation. And then we went up to Wisconsin just for a couple of days. But in general, we've been fairly local. But a lot of people, as you're getting ready to start the school year, use these last couple of weeks to do those final vacations before everything changes and you get back into the normal school routine. And so I understand that things with people's schedules can get a little sketchy during this time. So I think it's probably the best time that I can think of to tackle a highly sensitive subject that requires really that you be there every week for it. And that's why we're doing Identity Series right now. And for those of you who missed last week, I just want to encourage you strongly to go back and check that message out. Every week we stream the service, and then after we stream it, it's posted on YouTube for people to participate in after the fact. And then, as if that wasn't enough, we edited down to just the message so that you can just have that message portion. We post that to YouTube separately, and then every week when I send out my email, there's a link to that message at the bottom of the email. And the reason for that is, really, there is a need for us to understand, especially with this series, that each of these weeks build on the previous weeks. So like, for example, today we are talking about the fact that we are made in the image of God, right? Before we get deeper into what is my identity, you cannot have that conversation without first understanding that God made us a very certain way and that we are made in his very image, right? And so That discussion, which proceeds from this one, really is contingent upon us really getting our minds around this idea. And for that matter, where we were last week was foundational for us to understand even where we are this week. So if you missed it, please, please, please take the time to go back and listen at the very least to the message from last week's service. It's like 45 minutes long. And for me, when I'm watching videos on YouTube, if the person's slow talking, I watch it on 2-speed. And I just give you permission right now to go back and to try to listen to the message. If you're like 45 minutes, I can't do that. 22 and a half minutes if you listen to it on 2-speed. I will not be offended if you watch it on 2-speed. I talk faster than many people, and so you'll have a hard time with that, but go for it. If you want to watch it on 2-speed, no problem. But having that foundation and understanding where we were last week is important for this week, and this week will be even more important for the weeks that are to come. In fact, as we talk about identity from a Christian perspective, which is vital for us, it's vital for us, I'm just going to ask you to lock in today. Because whether you're a theology person or not, whether you're like, I don't care about theology, if you don't want to think about this, you are regularly confronted with, on a daily basis, all sorts of pressures against how you identify yourself and who you are and how others would seek to identify you. And if you cannot stand knowing who you are, then what will happen is you'll end up falling into what other people say you are. Okay, so it is so important that we lock in on this, just even for a moment, lock in. We're going to dive in just a moment, so you can grab your Bibles, open them up to Genesis chapter 1. That's where we're going to begin today. We're going to begin at the beginning. Before we get there, let me just mention what the next couple of weeks are going to look like. I mentioned to you last week that at least one of the services we were not going to be streaming online. For those of you who are joining online, it's not because we don't love you, but because of the nature of the culture we're in right now. We could be deplatformed by some of the things that I'm going to be talking about next week. Or not next week, sorry, the week after, August 28th. And so that week, August 28th, we will not be streaming the service. And just so you're aware of that, give you opportunity, if you can, to make it here, to be a part of that 28th. So next week, we'll be streaming like normal, except... caveat, next week we also have a missionary who is going to be here with us, who is in a sensitive country, and as a result, they've asked us not to stream their portion of the service. So we're going to move that to the end of the service. We'll stream right up until that, and then we'll have to cut it off for our online, because we don't want to put them in any sort of a dangerous position. So that's next week, but August 28th, as we tackle this identity idea, we will not be streaming online. Sorry for that. For those of you who join us online, we don't make that decision lightly, but we just want to make sure that you're aware of that. For all of us, just so you're aware of it, what we're going to be talking about on August 28th, because there are places, there are times to have conversations, and then there are times when maybe our kids might not be ready for those conversations. I just want you to know, especially to our parents, some of the things we're going to be talking about on that Sunday. Because as we talk about at least how our culture views our identity, it is very much tied to sexuality. Okay? So on that Sunday, we will be talking about sex. We will be talking about male and female relationships. We will be talking about pornography. Okay? So that's the conversation that we are having on August 28th. And if your kids are not ready for that discussion, and you know they're not ready for that discussion, I will say they're probably hearing a lot more than you think already. But if you feel like they're not ready, I totally respect that, and we have saved our conversations for the right places and the right times. So just be aware of that. That's August 28th. Next week, be here the 28th. If you feel like your kids aren't ready for that, I totally understand and recognize, and that's kind of in your court, okay? Cool. Real quickly, as a setup from last week, as we kicked off this series, and I can't do justice to the entire message in just a brief period, but just as a setup, we identified our identity. We gave the definition. Our identity is where our sense of self and our sense of worth intersect, where you see that intersection between who we think we are and how that brings us value. That is what we defined our identity as. And we had a much larger conversation about how that's confirmed and how that's affirmed. And we can't get into all of those things. I will say this. One thing we did talk about is that God knows us best and he loves us most. He knows us best and he loves us most. Okay, so that's part of where we were. And so at the intersection of our identity, God stands. And as he stands there, that is something to cling to, because while all else might change, God will still know us best, and he will still love us most. No matter what else shifts, whatever else changes, those two things will be the same, okay? So now we need to take that next step as we talk about our identity and recognize you always have to begin with the fact that we are made in God's image. And that's why we're in Genesis 1. At least that's part of why we're in Genesis 1. We could be in plenty of places as we talk about the fact that we are made in God's image. We could go to Psalm 139. We could go to Psalm 8. We could go to John 1. We could go to Ephesians 1. We could go to Colossians 1. Like, there's plenty of places that we could talk about the fact that we have been made in God's image. One of the reasons why we're in Genesis chapter 1 is because I know at the very least you've read that far. If we get into Ephesians 1, it could get a little sketchy, but Genesis chapter 1, we've all made it to page number 1, right? Like, so most likely you've read this, you've got it, but then the implications of how God made us are far-reaching across how we interact with our culture, whether we know it or not, okay? So we're going to read in Genesis chapter 1, verse 26 to start with. Genesis chapter 1, verse 26. We're going to go to the very basis of our value and self-definition here because we are going to our creation. Genesis chapter 1, and we're just going to read two verses, Genesis 1:26 and Genesis 1:27. Here's what it says. Then God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created them. Male and female he created them. God made us. And when he made us different than every other creature that he created. If you read how he creates those other beings, you can see it over and over again. He created the sea creatures and every winged bird according to its kind. Right? You see that phrase over and over and over again. According to its kind, according to its kind, according to its kind. And then when he comes to humanity, he says, let us make man in our image. Let us make man like we are. Of no other creature does God say that. Let us make it in our image. And so our sense of value and our sense of self is different than every other living creature. Okay? Now this might sound basic, and I'm sorry if you're like, man, I learned this in second grade Sunday school. That is so good. But there are a lot of people who have apparently not graduated from second grade yet. Because this is one of those things that you have to come back to, this basic building block. And the value and our sense of self is different than any other living creature, even though we were made from some of the same building blocks. You and I are not as different as you think. You may have a full head of hair. And you may think, oh, we are so different. Did you know that you and I have 99.9% of the same DNA? Our DNA makeup is 99.9% the same. You and I are not as different as you think. We are all very, very similar and are much closer than you think you are. Now, you have 98.7% of your DNA the same as a chimpanzee. We won't get into that. Well, maybe we should. Because some people look at that and they say, well, then that means we have a common ancestor. Because we have 98.7% of our DNA the same as a chimpanzee. Well, we share 90% of our DNA with cats. 85% of your DNA with mice. You share 80% of your DNA with cows. You share 61% of your DNA with fruit flies. I know. You share 60% of your DNA with a banana. This is all true. Now, some people look at that and they say, well, we must all have a common ancestor. What I look at is a God who built a very beautiful system, an incredible system. We could spend our lives examining how he created DNA and how it works to tell our cells to organize in such a certain way and be marveled or always marveling at our God on a daily basis. Because our God created us in such a complex way. And so he built this system, and then he built the different people and elements and creatures in that system. I see it as, and this makes sense to me, a God who gathered up dust, right? He gathered up the elements that make us who we are, and then he breathed into us. And I don't know what all is included in that, if that was literal dust, or if it was the DNA formations that he had already put in place, and then brings together and makes them into us. But understand that he created us. You are not an accident. You are a creation from the God who is over all of the universe. And when he made you, he set you at the highest place in that creation. He breathed into you and said, unlike any other creature in all of creation, I am going to make this one like me. And so he breathes, and that gives us the life that we have. Psalm 8 says that you are above all in creation and just a little lower than the angels. This is who we are. And to some degree, we know this like inherently. We would say this is self-evident. It is self-evident to us that we are different than all other creatures in creation. We know that. I don't want to make you cry, but I had a dog. And my dog, I used to go running with this dog, and I loved this dog. And then it got older, and we changed from running to walking. And then it couldn't walk anymore, and I put on 50 pounds. And then the dog got to the point where it couldn't even stand up anymore. And so when the bad days outweighed the good days, we took the step to put our dog down. We do that with our dog. We do not do that with grandma. Why? Because it is a fundamentally different thing. We were having a conversation with our kids just this week about language and why language is important and how sometimes you have to pay very close attention to the words that people use, because by getting you to accept the language that they use, they will get you to accept a premise that maybe you do not agree with just by accepting the language. So we were having this conversation about getting our dogs fixed. And we were talking to our kids about this. And we came to the conclusion that really we shouldn't call that getting our dogs fixed because our dogs are fixed. That really we should call that getting them broken. Right? Like that would be a more, and somewhere along the line somebody said, hey, let's call that getting them fixed because then it'll be more palatable for people, right? But I mean, we do that. We do not do that with people. Why? Because we understand inherently, it is self-evident that there is a difference between humanity and the rest of creation. Now, back up just a moment. Let's talk about the early 1900s in the United States, because it was not a fun place to be. There were some ugly things that were happening in the early 1900s in the United States with the eugenics movement. What happened? They removed this idea of us all being made in the image of God. And when you remove that idea, and we are all just the progression of social Darwinism, right? If we're just the progression of, then what we need to do is we need to remove the undesirables from our society. And this was a big thing, and you can look it up and read all you want about it in history. It was ugly. It reached its peak in Nazi Germany, but it was a part of the United States before that. And all of these things that we look at now and we say, oh my goodness, we understand inherently that that's not good, was not inherently understood when you remove the idea of the image of God from who we are. It was removed, and when it was removed, things got really ugly. But the fact that we are made in his image results in all different kinds of separations between us and the rest of creation. Let me give you a few. Some of these are bigger than others. Some of them you see little glimpses of it in others. But in general, some of the ways that his image results in all kinds of differences for us is our ability to reason, creativity, speech, self-awareness, morality, our emotion, our affections. All of those things are things that are different for us than the rest of creation. But let's zero in on 3 today. 3, what I'll call likenesses, as a result of the fact that we are made in the image of God that others do not have. Let me give you 3. 1, we have an inherent sense of value. We have an inherent sense of longing. And we have an inherent sense of purpose because of the fact that we were made in the image of God. The image of God gives us inherent value. These chairs are my wife's. This one here and this one here. Now, I remember when we got married that we said, what's hers is mine, what's mine is hers. Apparently, we were only half right. Because what's mine is hers, what's hers is hers. These chairs are hers. They are not my chairs. They are her chairs. They are her chairs because she found them. She found them on Craigslist or on Facebook Marketplace several years back. There was a guy who found these chairs in Mary Kay's mansion in Dallas, okay? So the pink mansion that she lived in until she died, that's where these chairs were. Now, they were not this color. Guess what color they were? They were pink, yes. And so when she found them, they were pink. And the wood was not as in good of a condition as it is right now. In fact, they were in pretty rough shape. She found them, though, for $150. These chairs are what is known as mid-century modern furniture. If you don't know what that style of furniture is, it was really from the 50s to the 70s that this style of furniture was huge, right? And it's made a massive return of late. When Liz and I watch any movie we watch, here's what happens. It's coming to a climax. It's a great movie. And she says, hey, look at that furniture. I'm like, are you even watching the movie? But this regularly happens. TV shows, movies, mid-century furniture is so huge that pretty much every movie you see will have some sort of mid-century furniture in it, and she'll be commenting on the furniture and the lamps, right? But these are not any ordinary version of mid-century furniture. These are specifically Adrian Pearsall chairs. That's what she said to me. She said, these are Adrian Pearsall chairs. And I went, whoa. And they were pink and faded, and the wood was kind of gnarly. And I was like, okay. So these chairs sat in her office for, 2 years. And then being the kind and attentive husband that I am, for Christmas one year, I decided to get them redone. Recovered, get the wood cleaned up. And so we brought them to a guy to get a price. And he said it would be $600. And I thought, well, it was the thought that counted. And we're good. But then he said, as soon as he saw them, he said, whoa, those chairs are sexy. As a man, I have never looked at a chair and thought those words before. But this guy apparently did. And he said, oh, those are Pearsalls. And my wife said, yes, we know. We got them from a guy who had them or got them out of the Mary Kay mansion in Dallas. See, she knew already that Adrian Pearsall's are highly coveted chairs. One time we go up to the mid-century modern furniture, like resale store that's on Commercial. And we go in and we're talking to the guy, and I think she mentioned the chairs that she had gotten a hold of. Not we, she got. And the guy goes, hold on a second. We're like, what's going to happen here? And he waits until people kind of like filtered out of he goes, come here. And he takes us back into this back room, and there's this, the Adrian Pearsall gondola couch, if anybody knows what that is. It's that, and he goes, I'm almost done, and when I get this done, we're going to sell it for somewhere around $20,000 to somebody in California, because that's who's buying all this furniture up. These chairs, specifically in their shape that they're in right now, are worth about $1,600 each. So these are Liz's chairs. They are Adrian Pearsall's. They are worth about $1,600, and they sit in her office. These chairs are Amazon Prime. They're worth about $100 a piece, and these sit in my office. And every now and then, the little bolt comes out of the side, and I have to, put it back in. And what gives this chair more value than this chair? The Creator. Who created it? And you, my friend, were created by He who is most valuable. And you are not a mistake. You are not a cosmic accident. You are not a grown-up germ. And you have value and you have dignity as a result. And this isn't about your potential, realized or unrealized. This is not about your capacities, realized or unrealized. It is not about whether or not you have accomplished what you were made for. Inherently, you have value because of who your Creator is and how He made you. He made you in His image. And this understanding, it is no small thing that is baked into the documents that founded America. And to back up here for a moment, every human right that we have really comes back to this idea at its center. You want to know what was at the center of the overthrow of the slave trade? It was this idea. First, let's back up and let's say that slavery is not an American issue. Slavery is a humanity issue. Every culture going back in history has dealt with this at some point. Why? Because we take advantage of each other. And yet, when you come back from that and you look at the overthrow of the slave trade, at its core was this concept. In the United States, there was some ugly times, and the Supreme Court at one point decided that a slave did not have the right to sue his owner. And there was a decision made in the Supreme Court. And then 40 or 50 years later, it was overturned. But in 1857, against Dred Scott, the Supreme Court decided against him. But in the dissenting opinion, one of the Supreme Court justices said this: a slave is not mere chattel. He bears the impress of his maker, and he is destined to an endless existence. This was at the core of the overturning of the lack of a human right, because we understand that we are made in the very image of God. Even somebody who hated Christianity, Friedrich Nietzsche, he said, and this guy hated Christianity. He's the one who most famously said, God is dead. He said, God is dead. He was okay with Jesus dying. He just didn't want Jesus to rise again. He hated Christianity. And even he had to say of Christianity, another Christian concept, but no less crazy, is the concept of equality of souls before God. This concept furnished the prototype of all theories of equal rights. The concept of inherent value for all humanity because of our creation and all equal rights movements as a result is the idea of the image of God. And if you do not know your value just as a result of that, let me give you a phrase which should put it in perspective. If you back up to Genesis chapter 1, verse 16, here's what it says. As God creates the sun and the moon and the stars, it says, "And God made the two great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night, and the stars." God made, by his very voice, the sun and the moon and the stars. The stars, which are grand in glory and beauty and complexity and sheer enormity. We still cannot count the extent of them. We cannot comprehend their full ferocity. We cannot even get close to them without fear of damage. They are beautiful and glorious and dangerous and massive. And they get 3 words. God just did that, and the stars. But you, he took the time to form from the dust and then to breathe into and to make into his very image. You are no accident, and your value is based on the very Creator himself. And when we diminish this for any of us, we diminish this for all of us. If this does not apply to everyone, then we diminish it for everyone. Because if it does not apply to everyone, then what happens, it is no longer a value that is inherent. It is a value that is based on strength. The strong have the value, and the weakest do not. That's why this is so important. At what point does a person receive value? At what point do they lose it? Right? If it comes from the image of God, then I think we should go to the God who knit us together in our mother's womb, who said to Jeremiah, "Before I formed you, I knew you and I called you." Your value is not contingent upon your strength. It is based on the fact that God made you. And anything less than value for the weakest is a value that is based on strength. Do not fall into that trap. Even the weakest bear the image of God and must be treated with the same value and dignity that we all get, okay? So, first, we have the likeness of inherent value because we are in the image of God. But the image of God also gives us inherent longing. Inherent longing. These chairs did not get their $1,600 value because they sat in Mary Kay's mansion. These got their value, and it made more sense to you when I mentioned and gave you information on who the Creator was. As you know the Creator, you understand the creation more. And the chairs, man, they're fun to sit in. Don't get me wrong. Like, this chair, like, as you check out how you sit in this chair. Like, you can't but. I feel like I need to just sit around and talk with the Beatles in this chair. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's not bad. You just push right out. These are Adrian Pearsall's. Amazon Prime. But the value is based on the Creator. And as you know the Creator, you know better the value. And the thing is, God has baked into every single one of us, as part of making us in his image, a desire to know him more. Blaise Pascal, a Greek philosopher, even said it this way: not only do we only know God through Jesus Christ, but we only know ourselves through Jesus Christ. We only know life and death through Jesus Christ. And apart from Jesus Christ, we cannot know the meaning of our life or our death, of God or of ourselves. You know him, and as we know him, we learn more about ourselves. And we have a longing to that end. That's what Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 11 says. That he has made everything beautiful in its time, and also he has put eternity into man's heart, yet so that he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. All religion, and there's like 4,000 of them, all religion is man's attempt to codify in practice and in ritual the desire for God. We have this desire to know him, or we are haunted by our lack of him. And the beautiful thing, this is what I find absolutely just mind-boggling, is as we get to know him more, we become a more true version of who he created us to be. Right? That's what 2 Corinthians 3:18 says. As we behold him, as we look at him, as we gaze on him with unveiled faces, beholding the glory of the Lord, we are transformed into the same image from one degree of glory to another. That as we seek him and as we know him, we actually become a more true version of ourselves and who he made us to be. And the flip side of that is true as well. That as we take our eyes off of him and we look at other things, maybe even those who oppose us, that as we look at those who oppose us, that's what happens in Numbers 13:33 when they're coming into the promised land and they send the spies, and the spies come back and they're like, oh man, the land is beautiful, right? But then we saw the descendants of Anak, right? The Nephilim who were in the land or whatever. And they're like, when we looked at them, we were like grasshoppers in our own eyes. And so we were to them also. So as we're looking away from him and looking at whatever issue or whatever kind of resistance we're receiving in our own eyes, we diminish. Were they like grasshoppers? No, certainly not with God on their side. But when they looked at that, that's what they became in their own eyes. And as a result, it says, and we were to them also. And I think that there's a deep truth there. What you think of yourself can form a reality that others may believe about you. As you diminish what God has made you to be, others will tack on. They'll join. When you become and believe about yourself, others will fall right in line and believe about you also. As a result of all of that, the image of God gives us inherent purpose. Because of our inherent value and because of our inherent longing, he gives us inherent purpose. You were made for a purpose. God made you and he made me for a purpose. You and I are a gift. We are the image of God. See, God didn't want us to make images of him. He didn't want us to replace him and have something that we worshiped, that we created with our own hands. Instead of idols, he made us his images that he placed here on earth. I was reading about Sean McVay. I don't even care about the guy's name because he's the coach for the Rams. I mean, who even cares about them at this point? So they win the Super Bowl, right? Which wasn't even a Super Bowl. It was against the Bengals. And who even watched it? I couldn't. Anyways, so the Rams win. Sean McVay gets a new massive contract. They haven't even released the kind of details of the contract. I was okay with the contract. I mean, he won the Super Bowl. Give him money. I mean, works. But then his alma mater, the University of Ohio, Miami, or University of Miami, Ohio, decided that they're going to build a statue of him. on their campus. I'm like, the dude's like 35 years old. Don't you think it's a little early to start building statues of him? I mean, he won one Super Bowl. Anyways, that has nothing to do with anything. I'm just kidding. But they built this statue, or are building this statue, because they want, when people show up on campus, for them to know that he belongs to them. And God made 8 billion statues of himself and put them on this earth. Do you think he's trying to tell us something? He wants us to know him. And I'm not saying that it's easily understood, but he made us for a purpose, to know him and to make him known. And he put us here with that purpose in mind. Even the artwork we went with for this series, Identity. Let's put that up there. So, you probably didn't pay a lot of attention to the artwork, but when we built it, we made it a specific way. We were going for a tag on a shirt. And you probably didn't take a lot of time to meditate on why we did that. You didn't stop and think deeply about it. But the idea behind it was this. We have a maker. And that maker knows us better than anybody else. And he knows what we need to not only survive, but to thrive. He knows how we need to care for ourselves and how we work. He knows us better than anyone. And so, we kind of tried to capture that with this imagery. Now again, you probably didn't, the first time we showed this on the screens, step back and say, I think they went with that imagery in order for me to understand that we have a maker and he knows better than anybody how I should live. He's the one who knows better than anyone how I can thrive. You didn't think that, but on a subconscious level, maybe you just grasped it a little bit, which is what we were going for. Just a subtle hint like, wait a second, there's more to this story of identity than how I want to define myself. There is a God who made me, who knows better than anyone else how I was made, and in his image, what that means. And in the same way, when he made us in his image, people may not fully grasp it, but when we look at one another, we get a taste of it. We get a taste of the fact that there is more here than just an animal, that there is more here, that we are designed. And even those who are far from him and would not pay homage to him will subtly with their words talk about the fact that we were created, that we were designed. It happens all the time. From those who refuse to admit that there's a designer, they recognize that it is an incredibly elegant design. We were made in his image. And whether we fully grasp it or not, we can taste it. We can taste it. We see it in one another as we look at one another. That is one of the implications of the fact that every human being was made in his image. Let me leave you with one final story. And this is a story that comes from as things start to turn against Jesus. So, the resistance against Jesus starts to amplify. And so then this is the point where plots start happening in dark rooms, behind the scenes, that there are plans for how to catch Jesus saying something he shouldn't have said or doing something he shouldn't do and turn the people or the government against him. And so they come up with this plan for how to catch Jesus in Matthew chapter 22, verse 15. Here's what it says. Then the Pharisees went and they plotted how to entangle him in his words. And they sent their disciples to him, along with the Herodians, saying, "Teacher, we know that you are true and teach the way of God truthfully, and you do not care about anyone's opinion, for you are not swayed by appearances. Tell us then what you think. Tell us then what you think. Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not?" But Jesus, aware of their malice, said, "Why put me to the test, you hypocrites?" I love how Jesus was really just very kind. And "Why put me to the test, you hypocrites?" That's pretty abrasive, right? Like, he called it like it was. And I think what's so interesting about that is their response afterwards. Because he just called them hypocrites, right? So Jesus' response is abrasive, it's aggressive. "Why put me to the test, you hypocrites? Show me the coin for the tax." And they brought him a denarius. And Jesus said to them, "Whose likeness and inscription is this?" And they said, "Caesar's." And he said to them, "Therefore render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's." And when they heard it, they marveled, and they left him, and they went away. At face value, this story seems to be just like Jesus putting them in his place. They're in their place, right? Like, he's just like, "Oh yeah, I will outsmart you." Like, it seems like that's what's going on here. But when you read that last verse, it says that when he responded that, when they heard it, they marveled. And then they left him and they went away. Now remember, these are the people who had been plotting in back rooms, who had developed a plan, and had come with the intention of implementing that plan. That was their whole purpose. And Jesus just smacks them down in front of everybody and calls them hypocrites. Like, you would think that it would say they were angry and they headed out the door because it didn't work. No, what it says is they marveled, which means something Jesus said, even for people who were decidedly in opposition to him and came with a plan to catch him, and who he just humiliated in front of everybody, in spite of all of those things, something Jesus said stops their brains in their tracks, and they are just left marveling. And what is that? Well, he has them pull out a coin and says to them, whose image is it? Whose inscription? And they say, well, it's Caesar's. Well, give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar. But then he says, and give to God what belongs to God. Whose image and inscription do you bear? Oh, yes, pay taxes to Caesar, but give God God's due. You are made in his image. You bear his likeness. You have his inscription on you. And it is only right that you would give yourself to him. And they marvel. Not only did he put them in their place, he helped them to understand how all of these things relate with the fact that they are made in the image of God. And you are too. And Jesus would say to you, whose likeness do you bear? Whose inscription? Well, then give to God what is God's, because you belong to him. I'm going to invite you to stand with me. That's what we were made for. And I love that quote, and I bring it up regularly. You'll never get me to stop saying it. It's a quote from St. Augustine, where he said, "You made us for yourself, and our hearts are restless until they find their rest in you. We were made, every single one, in the image of God. And sometimes that image, through sin, certainly, it can get marred, right? We can feel like that image is faded. And yet, ultimately, God's promise to us is this, that as we see him, and as we gaze at him, and as we behold his glory, that we are transformed from glory to glory, more and more back into that image that he made us for. So the marring and the fading, the brokenness, and all of those things cannot hold you or keep you from bearing that image. Not because you deserve it, not because you've earned it, not because you have untapped potential, but because he made you, and he is the creator, and he is beautiful. And because you are in his image, he made you beautiful also. So regardless of what you think in that intersection of self and value or worth, he made you. He defined who you are when he made you in his image. And he also gave you inherent worth and beauty as well. And though it may be marred, and though you may not feel like it, as you spend time in his presence, as you commit your life to him, as he does a work inside of you, that image comes back to the surface. He does that inside of you. As you gaze on his beauty with unveiled faces, we are transformed into his image from one degree of glory to another. That is his promise to you. And until you put your faith in him, until you accept that sacrifice of Jesus Christ for your sin, until you take that step, you will never find what he has made you to be. Why? Ultimately, because sin has separated us. And apart from Jesus Christ, we have no hope to get to God except through him. It is only through Jesus Christ. And so then the promise of Scripture is, as we put our faith in Jesus Christ and his sacrifice for our sins, as we believe in our hearts that God raised him from the dead, as we confess with our mouth that Jesus Christ is Lord, then we are saved. That's just the outlay of it. That's what the Scripture says. And until that time, then we are separated from him. And there is an eternal separation from him. And yet he says, in Jesus Christ, the fullness of heaven meets the neediness of earth, and all that you need can be found in him. Come to him. Come to him.